Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents That Time I Turned My Farm into a Dungeon 3, a progression farming fantasy, by S.A. Archer, narrated by Rebecca Estrella and Todd Mclaren. Prologue. "This way," I told my half-brother Rakthar as we ran through the dimly lit corridors of the dungeon. "I think I heard him over here." "Not so fast," Rakthar yelled, slamming into the walls instead of turning corners while he followed behind me. "I've got tiny legs." He was always such a klutz. The tiny leg comment was true, so I slowed down a bit. It wasn't just the lower half of his body either. With their hunched postures, long arms, and knuckles that dragged along the ground, trolls weren't exactly aerodynamic. Rakthar was even worse off than most in that regard. He had bigger, broader shoulders than any other troll, coupled with a more human set of legs like our father. Being such a klutz, you'd figure that after learning to rely more on his big arms to move himself around like a set of meaty crutches, he would have used those same arms to cushion himself against possible impacts whenever he threw his body around. Not even a little. The broken tusks jutting out of his face were a testament to how many faceplants he'd suffered in his young life just by virtue of his own movement. Still, no matter how many times he crashed, he still pulled himself back up to run around and crash again, over and over, like a blind bull. It was pretty admirable, but the numerous broken walls in Vastalon Keep meant that everyone who knew him well was hesitant to support his dream of joining a traveling circus as a unicyclist. But Rakthar the Iron-Boned was the son of my stepmother, Tana the Mountain Breaker, and had every drop of stubborn troll pride she had. He wanted to ride unicycles, and just like he always pulled himself up again, he practiced every day. Besides being stubborn, if Rakthar was anything else, he was hopeful to a fault in the face of any adversity. It's one of the things we all loved about him. I wish I was half as brave as he was. Oh, well, at least when it came to my dreams. Being my mother's firstborn meant Master Alchemist Ayana couldn't wait to start my alchemy training when I was barely 5 years old. When I realized I wanted to be a blacksmith rather than an alchemist like my intelligent, wolf-born mother, I was scared half to death to tell anyone. How was I supposed to tell my own mother that I wanted Grand Forge Master Barry as my mentor rather than her? My father was the one who convinced me to tell her eventually. Ironically, he mentioned Rakthar's unicycling dream when we talked about it, and that helped me realize that I have a good family. 1 father, 3 mothers, 9 brothers and sisters, all who liked me just for who I was. I mean, if Rakthar could want to be a unicycling circus performer, what was wrong with me wanting to work in a forge? Thank the gods I was good at it. Mother's alchemy training synergized really well with a lot of the lessons I got from Barry, and I was able to invent a few new metal alloys for the dungeon to use in weapons and machinery. Some of those new alloys let us use better, more efficient forging techniques, and Father even said that it even helped us win a few battles in the East. All of that before the ripe old age of 15, and I've got nowhere to go but up. Speaking of the war, we were dead in the middle of the biggest battle between the coalition of dungeons and our dreaded enemy, the Alliance of Adventurers. Growing up, I loved hearing the story of how the war against the adventurers started. My mothers were more than happy to oblige and tell the tale. All of us monsters lived our lives peacefully in the dungeons, picked on by greedy adventurers for most of our history, never getting a moment's peace between all of their raids. That was until my father, King Marusk, a simple farmer from a human town, came into the picture. Dungeons finally got a fighting chance against our oppressors. He killed an adventurer raiding his farm for no good reason. then used the adventurer's magic tools to build his dungeon up into the greatest power Marlassia had ever seen. Dungeons from all over joined up with him, and Vastalon Keep was born, with the head of the coalition of dungeons soon to follow. The adventuring guilds of the continent didn't like that we finally stood up for ourselves and joined together as the Alliance of Adventurers to put us back into our holes. We haven't backed down since, not even once, and now the Alliance was launching one final attack to break our spirits here on our doorstep. Everyone was getting ready for the looming battle, from the tallest to the smallest, and from the oldest to the youngest. Necromancers were raising armies of the dead, while cultists conjured demons with bodies that defied all logic. Beastmasters wrangled the many mutant creatures that called Vastalon Keep their home, and trolls and orcs equipped themselves with tough armors made of only the strongest metals, one of which, black mithril, I designed myself. It is tougher and lighter than both mithril and iron, and, forgive my bragging, but I can't help but be proud. Speaking of the aforementioned Beastmasters, Vastalon Keep was famous for a lot of things in the Coalition, and even the world at large, but our defining trait had to be King Marusk's mutant war creatures. He still says it's an accident to this day, but my father invented a special concoction of magical potions and different animal foods to create a viscous liquid that transformed ordinary animals into terrifying monstrosities. Chickens became like basilisks, bulls like minotaurs, goats like demonic satyrs, horses like hell beasts, donkeys like feral centaurs, pigs like siege rams, geese like cockatrices, dogs like werewolves, sheep like giant sea urchins, cats like saber-toothed tigers. Well, you get the idea. Not only were they stronger, bigger, and more ferocious, they also bred faster and grew to maturity quicker, all with the same amount of food. As if that wasn't enough, these beasts were miraculously easier to train than their non-mutant counterparts, making them perfect for all our growing needs as a dungeon. My father had won entire battles with these beasts alone. Father claimed these beasts and their tamers were the backbone of Vastalon's military might, and it was easy to see why. Along with the beasts and citizens of Vastalon, even the sons and daughters of King Marusk weren't spared from work on a day like today. I knew my eldest brother Garrett was called into a meeting with all the Coalition powers just a few hours before, and I was tasked with making as many arrows out of black mithril as I could before the adventurers came to our doorstep. It wasn't until stepmother Tana came to the forges to look for my father that Rakthar and I were roped into helping her search. The meeting with the Coalition had ended some time ago, and apparently King Marusk was nowhere to be found. Naturally, all of my mothers were starting to worry. Even Shaknazath, stepmother Zuthina's personal shadow demon, who could see and hear from every shadow in Vastalon Keep, couldn't easily locate him, and all three queens had decided to mobilize and search out of their own concern for him. The authority of the three queens of Vastalon notwithstanding, when my easygoing stepmother Tana was worried, every soul in Vastalon Keep was worried along with her. Thankfully, among King Marusk's many distinctive qualities, he had a unique voice and a laugh that I could have picked out in a crowd of thousands, which was how I heard that very voice echoing and booming through the underground passageways where Rakthar and I searched. I'd never imagined that someone like my father would ever be in danger in his own home, but it was good to hear him safe and sound. My mother should put a bell around his neck. As I turned the next corner into another corridor, we found a massive crowd nearly concealing our target. Rakthar crashed into the opposite wall clumsily, his feet sliding as we went. But not a soul turned to look at us. They were too enraptured, because there, sitting comfortably in the middle of his subjects, was my father. Thanks to Pebbles, the ancient earth spirit that only my father and sister Hallie could see, everyone had comfortable stools formed from the stone floor beneath them as they hung on to King Marusk's every word. The king of Vastalon Keep wore the dark plate armor that he seemed to wear like a second skin in these troubled times. It was adorned with pauldrons like wyvern skulls, and a cape like a moonless night flowed down his back. The slits of his horned helm let his piercing eyes, like shining rubies, peer through them as he looked upon the crowd. Despite his rather intimidating appearance, his presence was just as jubilant and warm as ever, ensnaring his audience with his spellbinding storytelling. He was the perfect king, both feared by his enemies and loved by his people. Sitting beside him was a barrel-chested dragon man in mithril plates. His orange-scaled wings were wrapped around him like a cloak as he kept his draconic muzzle pointed down, clearly embarrassed to be sitting at the center of attention. Garrett, our eldest brother and the first son of stepmother Zuthena, was far more comfortable on a battlefield commanding troops than he was being doted upon by my father. Unfortunately for him, the king loved doting on all of his children at every given opportunity. Just in front of the two, at the head of the crowd, was a pasty half-orc and an elderly iguana lizard-born, both dressed in the thick leather armor of beastmasters. They were listening as intently as anyone, if not more, and if I had to guess what had happened, these two had managed to catch the king and ask him for one of his famous life stories. Inevitably, my father got carried away when he started talking about one of his wives or one of his kids, and the story had undoubtedly turned into a full retelling of his whole life. Now came the troubling task of catching my father's attention among all of these people so he could get back to the gates and... Finding the adventurer's big secret wasn't easy, and I wish that I could take all the credit for... King Marusk's piercing gaze cut through the crowd and landed on me. Oh, is that Jinyi back there? And Rakthar? It is! Everyone make way for my beloved son and daughter. Get up here, you two. Suddenly, the crowd split in two, and the stone chairs bled back into the ground, making a perfect path between our father and us. The people clapped and cheered for our arrival like this was a planned ceremony, and I felt every eye of their collective gaze upon us as I quickly shuffled my wolf paws along the floor. Rakthar waved and blew kisses to his adoring audience before nearly falling over on his own 2 feet, catching himself on his fists as he carried himself over to our father. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the best metallurgist the world has ever met, Jinyi Metalweaver. My father showed me off to the people of Vastalon. How many new metals have you invented now, Jinyi? 4, Father, I answered quietly. But, Father, you should... Indulge me for a moment, Jinny. Then we can talk. My father never missed an opportunity to brag about his children's accomplishments. So, which metals have you invented, if I may ask, Metal Weaver? Well, there's oilless steel. I counted the different metals on my fingers. That's what our silverware is made of now, since it doesn't rust. Then there's quicksilver, which channels magic most efficiently for our spellcasters' staves and wands. And then diamond obsidian, which, while not technically a metal, can hold a finer edge better than any metal we have for cutting into other metals. And, of course, black mithril, which makes up most of our armor and weapons since it's easier to make and performs better than mithril on its own. A lot of oohs and ahs sounded from the crowd, followed by polite clapping. I get it. My skills aren't exactly thrilling, but it felt nice to share a little, even if my father was hopelessly embarrassing. And then there's my tumbling boy, Rakthar the Iron-Boned, the toughest troll in this dungeon." King Morusk patted his broad-shouldered son on the back. "You think a mace to the jaw from some limp-wristed adventurer is going to faze him? Nay, he just won't stay down. I know. I've tried it myself. Once he's mastered the unicycle, nothing in this world will knock him over." The crowd cheered and laughed as Rakthar absorbed their praise like a sponge, bowing and catching himself from hitting his head on the ground. That top-heavy troll loved the attention. Maybe that was why he wanted to be a unicyclist. The center of a crowd was clearly where he felt most at ease with himself. "A unicyclist? I swear," Lord General Garrett smirked. He always took things way too seriously, but even he couldn't help but chuckle at his trollish younger brother. "Literally the furthest thing away from your talents, experience, and even body type. And that's the wall you choose to beat your head against?" "Beating my head against walls is kind of my whole thing," Rakthar pointed out to the amusement of the crowd. "If I let this one get under my skin just because it's a metaphor, all the other walls are going to think I've gone soft. Walls don't break me. I break walls." Just like his father, Rakthar could really work a crowd, and the uproarious laughter quickly turned into uproarious cheers for Rakthar's eventual victory over his own balance. Garrett clearly felt the mood of the crowd and turned away, hiding a prideful smile at his brother's resilience. "So anyway, what are you two doing here?" King Morusk said as the crowd died down. "Did your mothers send you to find me?" "No one's seen you since the meeting with the Coalition," I informed him. "We need you to lead the defense against the Alliance's invasion. It could be any minute." "Any minute might be giving them too much credit," he said. Without another word, my father summoned an orb of shadows. It was filled with arcane visions of faraway places and served as a magical window into the war camp, which acted as a staging area for the Alliance of Adventurers' invasion of Vastalon Keep. We watched as the adventurers stocked themselves on what few health potions they could. Warriors sharpened their blades, and spellcasters prepared their spells from their arcane books. From the sky, several winged giants in glittering white mail came down from the heavens, joining the ranks of the adventurers on the ground. "See?" The king clutched his hand as the shadowy window disappeared. "They haven't even left their camp. And we've got scouts flushing out any infiltrators at the walls or deep in these passageways. We've got plenty of time before we really have to worry. Besides, if something happens, I can be right up there in less than a minute. Believe me when I say we're fine." "Okay, well, can you tell that to our mothers?" I asked him. "They're trying to bring you topside to coordinate the defense." "I see," my father said, sucking his teeth and staring around at the sizable crowd. It was clear he realized that once again, his stories had gotten the better of him. "Oh, boo, zh," the iguana lizard-born stammered, obviously feeling guilty for keeping his ruler away from his worried wives. Seeking a scapegoat in the young half-orc next to him, he slapped him up the backside of his head. "Tiberius," the lizard-born spat at his companion. "How could you keep the king so busy with your incessant questions? Don't you know the king's a busy man? Apologize to his majesty this instant." "Oh, I'm sorry." The younger beastmaster winced, seeming not to question the fact that the iguana had thrown him to the wolves to save himself. "I had no idea my yearning for our king's autobiographical accounts would cause so much trouble." The half-orc stammered timidly as he knelt. "I'll consider it a compliment to my storytelling talent," my father said, forgiving the two beastmasters. "But if my ladies are asking for me, then I probably shouldn't keep them." Everyone in the crowd tried their best to stay silent on the matter, but some couldn't help but groan or murmur, clearly wanting King Marusk to continue his story. No one was going to openly act against the will of the queens, not if they wanted to keep their muscles attached to their bones. But as I said, he could tell a good story. So of course my father saw the will of the people in their slow migration from the corridor and acted of his own will. On the other hand, King Marusk sat back down. This last bit of the story isn't that long, so we could probably finish up here first, if any of you are willing to. The crowd reassembled themselves around him quickly, just as they were before. Once every cheek was firmly back in its stone seat, they leaned in intently, eagerly awaiting every word that came from their king's lips. Well, it's not as if we can refuse a king's direct order, the old lizard scoffed, wiggling his hips on the seat as he got comfortable again. I suppose we have no choice but to listen to more of, "Borgonon, sir, I don't think that was an order," Tiberius whispered to his senior in front of everyone. "He was just seeing if any of us wanted—" "Quiet, you!" Borgonon, the lizard-born, slapped his junior over the head again. "You know that you'll have hell to pay if any of our mothers come down here, right?" Garrett said as he sat himself down, resigning to hear the end of the tale. "And with all due respect, Father, I will personally see to it that neither Jinyi nor Rakthar are caught up in their wrath." "Thanks, Garrett," I said, hugging my grim big brother around his waist. It was a load off my mind knowing that I was safe from my mother's punishments. "Oh, you're a lifesaver, Garrett," said Rakthar as he scuttled himself to the opposite side of our big brother, clearly remembering the last of Tana's punishments, which often came in the form of brutal workouts. "I guess you're all too old for me to use you as cuteness shields to distract your mothers anymore," our father said with a grin. "Now, back to the story. Where did I leave off again? I lived on the farm, killed the adventurer, got my friends to help me with the magic stuff, accidentally made mutant animals, upgraded my farm to contain them, became a troll chief, got a troll wife, fought some adventurers, bedded one of them, let a whole town stay on my farm, met and bedded a dragon, fought her dragon father, fought a demon, turned the demon into a guard dog, fought an army, fought a demon army, got my own demon army, found out about more dungeons, found a graveyard with a friendly lich, fought a guild master, then an entire guild, and then— Aw, did we miss the part about our moms?" Rakthar sighed. "I like that part." "Ew," I said, wrinkling up my nose. "I don't really want to hear about our father romancing our mothers." Beside me, Garrett chuckled. "Right," my father said, holding up a finger. "The secret to adventuring enchantments. So in order to get to that, we have to head near the end of the Beast Wars and meet up with an old friend."
Chapter 1. Years Ago. Maybe we'd be home sooner than we thought this time. Maybe. Looking for allies against the adventuring guilds, I'd taken some of my own forces to visit other dungeons across the continent. Said forces were mostly made up of a roaming band of mutants and their tamers, so we looked more like a migration of beasts rather than a conspicuous act of war marching on a nearby city. This gave us a modicum of peace, and the only trouble we had was straggling hunters and bandits, along with the occasional adventuring party. They couldn't help but stick their noses in everyone else's business, but most real troubles kept themselves clear. The strategy was fairly streamlined in every dungeon. Evaluate their defenses against the nearby adventuring guild's forces, then either fortify and protect, or evacuate and disguise. Fortifying and protecting was as simple as giving supplies and weapons to a dungeon to help them keep their local guild from barging in whenever they felt like it. After some reinforcements on their structures, a few siege weapons and defense strategies, extra food and supplies, any extra soldiers and beasts that we could spare, and they were usually ready to go. Occasionally our visit would line up with an adventuring raid like a happy coincidence, and we'd get to prove ourselves as allies. Mostly, our overall job was just to weaken the nearby adventurers so they couldn't mount as many raids, which could range from buying up all the health potions they needed in the towns to make the deaths of high-grade adventurers look like dungeoneering accidents. We couldn't let nearby guilds know we were actively killing their kind. It only led to more trouble, and the adventurers that got suspicious of our activities were usually the ones that we ended up killing and staging like they died in the field. Many dungeons, though, were in too tight a spot to simply be assisted in their adventuring defense. Sometimes the adventuring guild nearby was too powerful, and the dungeon dwellers weren't prepared for a single adventuring party to come through. In those cases, we'd evacuate the denizens as soon as we'd convince them, then fill in their spots with some undead skeletons disguised as the former inhabitants, courtesy of our lich friend Fluffers. If we could manage it, we'd provoke the adventurers into sending a bunch of their parties into the empty dungeon and kill them, crippling their forces as much as we could. Some evacuations were easier than others, depending on how easily we could sabotage the adventurers' starport and establish our own. In short, starports used constellations in the sky to teleport groups of people between 2 points connected by the formation of stars. Hijacking their starport would let us use it to take all the people in the dungeon to our Vastalon dungeon in the blink of an eye, making the whole process of transporting all these refugees a snap. We could also afford to stick around in any one dungeon longer to kill more adventurers before we had to safely bail out. Regardless of whether or not we could get magical assistance, we would always get everyone out without a scratch and without any suspicious adventurers trying to poke around at our affairs. Of course, such a consistent success rate wasn't possible without my 3 girls accompanying me every step of the way. Each one was like a storm trapped in a woman's body, and I was being a bit more literal than metaphorical here. The devastation any one of them could bring to an enemy, an army, or a whole town could be considered on par with hurricanes, floods, and lightning, including the literal hurricanes, floods, and lightning that Zuthena could control with her magic. She was a fire dragon, fearsome and beautiful, and the molten orange hue of her scales glistened as her dragon breath bathed armies in flame. When she wasn't a dragon, she was in her human sorceress form, with platinum strands of hair flowing down her shoulders, fair skin like snow, and fiercely red lips. The elegance and determination that shined through her expressions betrayed her youthful appearance. The slender limbs of her body were usually adorned in extravagant, mystical dresses in vibrant colors, kept perfectly clean with her powerful magic. Luckily for me, the curves of her delicate frame didn't exactly hide within the tight-fitting cut, and I could see the sensuous way her body moved if I stared. One of her arms was usually adorned with an elbow-high gauntlet encrusted with several gemstones of every color, each one filled with sorcerous might that further augmented her natural powers. With the commanding presence of a royal empress and the occult knowledge of an archmage, even Zuthena's human form was as royal and fearful as her dragon persona. As far as natural power was concerned, Tana, the troll chieftainess, had more than anyone I knew in this world, rivaling Zuthena's dragon strength. Second to her strength was her speed, which allowed her to move faster than the human eye could follow. She was a solid wall of defined muscle. She had childbearing hips and a bust to match, a fact she proudly displayed with barely any decency if she wore anything at all. Her hair was wild like a lion's mane, stretching down her back like an auburn.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?